It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying. By rayrae118, my personal reading, Chapter 12. Things changed a bit after that. The rest of July went by in a haze of visits from friends, Quidditch games, and of course, more studying. Neville got to have a nice talk with his grandmother, who, for once, didn't spend the whole conversation comparing him to his father and complaining about how he didn't match up. It seemed his initiative to involve her in this secret with Sirius Black had changed something in the formidable dowager. Indeed, though she didn't know how to express it, she was truly proud of the way he had stood up for his father's friend, and she was willing to allow him to gain a closer friendship with the fugitive, though hopefully he wouldn't be one for much longer. Neville had also spoken with her about Harry, where he went into a little more detail about his new friend's childhood, though not sharing too much as he didn't want to betray Harry's trust, ending with the request he had made to get more information on his godmother. Augusta was shocked, even more so when she learned Harry hadn't even known who his godmother was before this summer. She couldn't help but think that, had things been just a bit different, Harry and Neville might have grown up as brothers. She was used to feeling disappointment towards her young heir, but the change this summer had wrought was a complete 180. Neville was going over to Harry's new home early every day now, and the result was a more confident young man. He told his grandmother that the two of them were studying and just talking, and that Sirius had been sharing a lot of stories about their parents. He even told her he was getting more comfortable on a broomstick. Augusta wanted to meet the boy who had changed her grandson so much. If Harry was able to do this, she had no doubt he had to be a rather special young man. Molly had spoken with Minerva, and after hearing the whole story, was shocked that Dumbledore would be so inattentive. She offered her former professor her full support. Things were a little tense when she learned that the infamous murderer Sirius Black was also in residence, but when she learned that truth as well, she mellowed. Seeing him again was nerve-wracking, but Sirius was well enough by this point that he really didn't look like he had spent 12 years in prison, and one on the run at all. He was funny, charismatic, and charming, and any compunctions the Weasley matriarch had about her children spending time at McGonagall Castle vanished. They seemed to bond a little over their desire to be a parental figure to Harry. She remembered him from the Order of the Phoenix during the war with Voldemort, and she and Arthur were several years older, and though they hadn't been very close, she had enjoyed spending time with him, as well as Lily, James, and Remus. She had never really warmed up to Peter, and now she knew why. Susan was also becoming a regular presence in the McGonagall household. She enjoyed spending time with Harry and Neville, especially Neville, and she too was enjoying getting to know Sirius, especially since it seemed as if the man might become a permanent fixture in her life, if her aunt had anything to say about it. As her parents had been much older than him, he didn't have too many stories. They had been in their 7th year when he started at Hogwarts. Most of what he knew of them came from the few years after graduation, when they had been members of the Order of the Phoenix together. He did, however, tell her a lot about her aunt. Amelia had apparently been a few years ahead of him in school, but when he joined the Aurors, she had been one of the training volunteers, as she had only finished her training a couple of years earlier. They had enjoyed a rather light, flirtatious relationship that had had hints of being something more, had they had the time, and had events not unfolded as they had. Harry was enjoying getting to know her as well. He remembered the events from the 2nd year quite well, and how most of the Hufflepuffs had shunned him, thinking he had been the one to petrify Justin, but Susan had never said a bad word against him. One afternoon in July, he finally asked her why. Susan shrugged a little sheepishly. "You seem just as scared as the rest of us," she explained. "I didn't think you'd do anything to hurt anyone. Although I'm sorry I never really fought for you against my Besides, your mother was a Muggleborn, as is one of your best friends. Why would you have any sort of vendetta against them? Harry smiled, and nothing more was said on the subject, though he definitely felt closer to the girl after that. He was enjoying making new friends, and felt that Susan could be a lifelong one. Hermione had left with her parents on holiday to Spain. They would be gone for about 2 weeks, but Hermione promised she would be back by Harry's birthday. Harry was very glad for that, because it would be the first time he was actually able to celebrate it with his friends. He didn't want a huge affair, but somehow he knew Aunt Minerva and Sirius would be going all out. They still maintained that they wanted to spoil him rotten. Ron and Ginny were also over at the castle a lot, though Ron was much more reluctant to study than the rest. Surprisingly, a comment from Harry on how impressed Hermione would be if she came back and all his summer assignments were complete was enough for Ron to buckle down and hit the books. Ginny had given the black-haired boy a knowing smirk, but Harry had just smiled in return. He may be a boy, but he wasn't clueless. Ron had told him that he was invited to attend the Quidditch World Cup with his family. His father had managed to get tickets, and even his oldest brothers would be there. Harry was excited, but he saw the look in Neville's eyes at the mention of the match. Harry knew that Neville would not be going, as his grandmother was not a fan. The opportunity to do something about that arose a few days later. Neville hadn't been able to come over, as his grandmother had asked him to do something at home, and Ron had used some improper language in front of his mother, so it was just Susan and Ginny that day. Later in the afternoon, Amelia showed up, spending some time just cuddling with Sirius on the sofa. Harry entered the room nervously and was pleased that, at least, they weren't snogging. Amelia, do you have a minute? He asked. The two adults sat up straighter, and Amelia nodded. Of course, Harry. Is something wrong? Harry shook his head and sat down on the armchair across from the pair, twisting his hands together in his lap. I just wanted to ask you something. Susan mentioned that you were going to get tickets for the World Cup. I was hoping you might be able to coordinate with Mr. Weasley, so that we could all sit together. Amelia nodded thoughtfully. She would certainly be able to do that. I don't see why not, she agreed, smiling at how he and her niece had become such good friends. Harry shifted in his seat. I was also wondering if you might be able to get an extra ticket. Neville's not going, and I know he's really disappointed at that. I was hoping you might be able to get one for him as well. I can pay for it, he hurried to add, but was cut off when Amelia shook her head. I will get him a ticket, but I'm not going to let you fit the bill, she smiled. Neville's a nice young man, and I'd like to do this for him. We'll call it a birthday present. How about that? Think you can keep it a secret until then? Harry nodded, grinning as he stood up. Thanks, Amelia. This means a lot. Both adults smiled at the charitable young man, though that expression changed to embarrassment at the next moment, when his eyes took on a devious glint. Now, I'll let you go back to what you were doing. And remember, Padfoot, don't do anything I wouldn't do. He hurried out of the room before they could yell at him. He was still laughing when he found Ginny waiting for him at the foot of the stairs. Harry gulped nervously, wondering if she had heard. Apparently, she had, but she wasn't disappointed. She just gave him a gentle hug, smiling as she stepped back. That was a nice thing you did, Potter. Harry returned the smile, and the two headed to the library. I know how much he wants to go. I didn't want to have to ask your dad if he could get one more ticket. I know Amelia's got some more pull, and I don't think she's actually gotten hers and Susan's yet. Ginny nodded her understanding, and promised to keep it quiet, as the two of them entered the library and sat back down next to Susan, returning to their respective books. Harry's birthday was a quiet affair, or as quiet as it could be with Molly Weasley involved. She and Minerva had had a bit of an argument when it came to the food, with the professor finally relenting and letting Molly bring the cake. Well, herself were quite eager to take care of the rest of the meal. It seemed that they had grown quite fond of her new charge, and wanted to make his birthday the best ever. Not that that was much of a challenge. Minerva had been hard-pressed to hide her laughter, as Sirius hadn't even tried, watching the excitable creatures interrogate Harry on his favourite foods. Hermione had returned the day before, and was there, looking very tan. Ron and Ginny came, along with their parents, Fred and George. Mr. Weasley and the twins had been informed of the situation, and promised to keep it a secret. Fred and George were awestruck at the moment they learned that Sirius Black was Padfoot, and that they had actually spent a year being taught by Moony. Remus was also there. It had taken some doing, a stern talking to from Minerva, where she informed him that all those empty bedrooms were just going to waste, and quite a bit of pleading from Harry before he consented to move in. But only temporarily, and he drew the line on Minerva buying him his own new wardrobe. Still, he couldn't deny how happy Harry was in his new home. When Minerva and Sirius had informed him of what had happened at the beginning of the summer, he had to go and take a few minutes, just to ensure he wouldn't go and do something rash. Like Hex 1 Vernon Dursley within an inch of his sanity. As they continued, telling him their theories on why Dumbledore had left him there, and why the leader of the Light had done nothing at the evidence of obvious abuse. He included the old man in his thought of hexing. He didn't want to believe what they were telling him. Not of the man who had made a Hogwarts education possible for him, but listening to their theories, and hearing Harry's explanations for his first few years at Hogwarts, he really couldn't come to a different conclusion. Suddenly, Dumbledore's request of him not to try and connect with Harry before he came to Hogwarts made much more sense. Susan and Amelia were there as well, and so were Neville and Augusta. Neville had invited him over for dinner the night before, as he just wanted a quiet celebration at home. He had been surprised to even receive so many presents. But Susan, Ron and Ginny had all sent him gifts. Harry had given him a Muggle book on plants, which Neville seemed to revere, especially seeing the glossy, coloured photos on the pages. Augusta was pleased to finally meet Harry, and seemed impressed by the young man. On a bit of a whim, Harry invited her to come with Neville to his party the next day, which she graciously accepted. Minerva watched the gathering with a proud smile. As they were trying to keep their situation quiet for as long as possible, she hadn't invited any of her colleagues to come, though she reserved that idea for next year. She wanted to show off her new charge. She knew that Phileas and Pomona would definitely be surprised come September. Severus probably would be as well, but not in a good way. Sometimes she wondered why Albus had hired him. He really was hindering a whole generation. The number of eligible Aura and Healer candidates had decreased dramatically since his appointment, as fewer and fewer could meet the potion's OWL and NEWT requirements. Tibby and Miller, her two head house elves, had set up a rather impressive spread outside, on the edge of the Quidditch pitch, under a tent to provide some shelter from the sweltering July sun. The adults sat in the shade, watching their children fly about in an impromptu game. The teams were a little uneven, with Ron playing keeper on one end and Hermione on the other, though she tended to lurch in the other direction whenever the quaffle came towards her. Harry and Ginny made up one set of chasers, and Neville and Susan made up the other. Fred was beater for Harry's team, and George played beater for Neville's. The air was filled with shouts of laughter as the adults looked on, smiling at how much fun their children were having. At lunchtime, the kids all descended rapidly, and fell upon the food with a ravenous fervour. Mrs. Weasley had truly outdone herself with the cake. It could have easily fed twice the amount of people present, and had a miniature Harry done in frosting, flying around the top in pursuit of a tiny golden frosting snitch. Harry's eyes almost bulged at the pile of presents waiting for him. Aunt Minerva and Sirius were doing their best to undo years of lessons beaten into him by the Dursleys. But Harry didn't think he'd ever get used to people spending so much on him, or people wanting to spend anything on him. Hermione gave both him and Neville their presents, since she hadn't been able to send anything from Spain. Harry couldn't wait to read a dueling techniques for the Master, while the 3 gardening pots she had brought back from him from Spain intrigued Neville. They were very pretty, with the Spanish patterns, and would look quite nice in his greenhouse. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley gave him a book on wizarding lore and a tin of fudge. They had collaborated with Minerva a bit to make sure it wasn't a book he already owned, but they thought he might like it, considering what his godfather had been through. Fred and George's present impressed Harry, as he pulled out some homemade joke products. He knew they were interested in opening a joke shop, but he hadn't realised they were so far along. He gave them a searching look, and they just winked. Ron's gift of chocolate frogs was typical and reassuring. So many things were changing in Harry's life. It was nice to see something predictable. Susan and Amelia gave him a faux glass and aura handbook. Harry wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life, but being an aura definitely was a contender, especially after learning that his father had been one, as had his grandfather. Charles Potter had been one of the most celebrated heads of the DNLE in the last 500 years. His death at the hands of the Death Eater raid was what had given Barty Crouch Sr. his rise to the top. Neville and Augusta had presented Harry with a thin, handwritten volume that left Harry speechless. Turning the pages, he discovered the book to be a journal, written by Neville's mum. A few pages in, the handwriting began to change in certain places, and Harry realised that this book was a collaboration between Alice and his mother. There were some recipes he thought might be potions that the 2 women had created themselves. A picture was stuck between 2 pages, and Harry pulled it out. A lump in his throat, as he took in the smiling faces of Alice Pruitt and Lily Evans. They must have been in their 3rd or 4th year, and were clearly best friends. Harry looked up, eyes shining as he thanked the Longbottoms fervently. Augusta just gave him a gentle smile and nodded, but Neville looked like he understood completely. Remus's gift also brought a few tears to his eyes. The stuffed dog, wolf and stag animals looked rather worn, and Remus told him how he had managed to collect them from the house at Godric's Hollow, and kept them all these years. He had wanted to give them back to Harry, but he wasn't sure if it was something that would be desired. Harry loved Ginny's present as much as Neville's, though part of it was probably just because she had given it to him. Ginny had woven him a friendship bracelet, using predominantly green and red threads. The significance of the colours was noted by both Sirius and Minerva, though Harry didn't seem to get it. She had gotten a little charm attached to it. The miniature snitch's wings fluttered a little bit. The hug Harry gave Ginny was definitely noticed by all the Weasleys, who made vows to figure out what that was about later. Surprisingly, Ron just smiled at the closeness the 2 seemed to have. He had talked with Ginny, and was happy with her answers. That didn't mean he wanted to see them snogging anytime soon, but he knew Harry would treat her right. Once he had opened all the presents from his guests, there was still a sizable stack left. Harry was almost silent as he unwrapped the gifts from his guardians. As Sirius hadn't been able to do any shopping, he had asked one of the McGonagall elves to visit Gringotts and retrieve some money, which he then gave to Minerva to help cover the costs. It was time to start using that black family fortune, and in ways that his parents would definitely have not approved of. Harry was awed by what he had received. Several new books on defense and transfiguration, Quidditch pads, a carrying case for his firebolt, a new perch for Hedwig that would match all the furniture in his room, an arm holster for his wand, and perhaps the best gift, a certificate that promised him a trip to a wizarding eye doctor. He looked confused at this, but that changed to a grin when Minerva explained, "There's a new procedure that's just come out that can fix eyesight. It's not very well known, as it is very new, but it's perfectly safe, and you will not need to wear glasses again." Harry thanked everyone for their thoughtful presence, before he was once more dragged away to the pitch for a rematch. It seemed that Neville and Susan did not like being beaten 100-30. It probably helped that Harry and Ginny had Ron as the keeper on their team. He had actually had some practice. As the party began to break up, Amelia gestured for Neville's attention, so that she could present her own gift to him. He looked at the ticket in confusion. Amelia smiled. "I had an extra ticket to the World Cup, and I thought you might enjoy it. It's in the same box as the Weasleys, so we will all be together." Neville turned to look at Harry, who was beaming. Mr. Weasley fielded a few questions from his children, indicating that they had, in fact, coordinated so that they could all sit together. Neville then looked up at his grandmother. Her austere nod indicated she had already been consulted and given her approval. Amelia was a long-time colleague, and her niece seemed to be growing into a mature and responsible young woman. Neville mouthed a thank you to Harry, knowing that he had to have had something to do with all of this. Once most of the guests had left, Amelia gave Harry his second present. She told him of how her investigation had uncovered multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement by one Vernon Dursley. She had handed over the evidence to the Muggle authorities, and they had made an arrest the day before. The company he had worked for, Grunnings, were quite pleased to have been informed of what their employee had been up to. She decided, however, not to tell him about the money they had been given for his care. She didn't want him to have to deal with the knowledge that they had effectively been stealing from him. Harry just kept smiling as everyone left through the fireplace, until it was just him, Sirius, Remus and Minerva once more. "So, did you have fun?" Sirius asked, smiling. Harry just gave him a hug. When he stepped back, he moved over to hug Minerva and Remus as well. They all watched, smiling, as he headed up to his room. It was truly great to see a happy Harry Potter. It made them all feel like they were making a difference. Albus Dumbledore entered his office and let out a contented sigh, happy to be home after a rather harrowing few weeks at an ICW conference in Japan. He glanced around the room, taking in the sleeping portraits, the overflowing desk, Fawkes asleep on his perch, the instruments puffing away in the corner. Albus frowned, going over to investigate that corner more closely. Most of the instruments were still working, but there were two that had stopped. Both instruments were used to monitor one particular student. The one in front dealt with the wards on Privet Drive. The second monitors Harry's health and magic levels. Albus's eyes widened in alarm as he set down his bag he had been carrying and immediately disapparated to Surrey. There appeared to be nothing wrong on the outside, but no one answered the door when he knocked. Albus furrowed his brow in confusion. "Are you looking for the Dursleys?" Albus turned around, suddenly thankful he had the foresight to transfigure his purple and silver robes into something Muggle-appropriate. Well, Muggle-appropriate had he been visiting the neighbourhood 50 years ago. He nodded as he made his way down the walk. "Yes, I was. Have they taken a family trip for the day?" Mrs. Number 6, who had always disliked Petunia for her nosy habits, never mind the fact that she was much the same way, sniffed. "I should think not," she replied haughtily. "It was quite the to-do. Yesterday morning the constable showed up and arrested Vernon." Albus's eyes widened. "Can you tell me the charges?" he asked urgently. If the police were involved, the chances of him getting Harry to come back here was slim. Though, theoretically, The wards could be replicated as long as he lived with his aunt, and as long as he hadn't stopped thinking about the place where Petunia dwelled as home. Mrs. Number 6 leaned forward, as if she was sharing a secret. The rumour is he was embezzling funds from his company, and, get this, from his own nephew. We were all told that the boy was no good criminal with not a penny to his name. Turns out his relatives were being given a monthly spended to help care for him, and they spent not a pound on him. So horrible. I wish I could apologise to the boy, but he hasn't been seen around here in weeks. Not since the first week of summer, I think. Albus numbly walked away, barely able to give the woman a farewell. The idea that Harry had not been seen for weeks was troubling. The monitor on his health was not working was also worrying. That device would only stop if Harry was dead or behind some very powerful wards. Only a Fidelius or the wards surrounding some of the older ancestral homes could interfere with his monitor. He also had to wonder how they had found out about the spended. Dumbledore had authorised a monthly payment of £500 from the Potter estate for Harry's upbringing. He had known that it hadn't been used as such, but he had considered Harry's treatment here just the cost of safety, for the greater good. Arriving back at school, he looked around somewhat helplessly. He didn't even have anyone he could talk to right now. He would ask Molly if she knew anything, and if not, to keep an eye out. He would also send a note to Minerva, asking for a moment of her time as soon as she was able. But other than that, the only thing he could do was wait until September the 1st, and hope Harry was on that train. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. Ooh, okay, so I really love the birthday bit. That's so gorgeous. As I said, characters being spoiled when they've earned it really, really helps and heals something inside me. I love that. And the bit with Albus at the end. Well, you brought this on yourself, old man. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.